is part 2 of today's lesson on Chapter 5, Section 5, dealing with customary units. And so this part asks us to convert measurements. And so what we'll end up needing is this page number, page 250. And I copied page 250, the conversion factors that you'll need. Some of the students end up using their planner for these conversion factors as well. Either way it works. So let's take a look at a few of the problems. 104 ounces we need to change to pounds. Now there's two ways to do unit conversions. You can either use the method in which you set up a proportion, or you can do some dimensional analysis, is when you end up multiplying two fractions together to cancel out terms. And I use that method. So that's the way I'll go ahead and go with. And the reason I use that method is because when we get into 7th grade, we end up changing maybe ounces to tons. And when we do that, we need to use this dimensional analysis method because we're going to end up having to do more than one iteration. And so we'll start off with this first one, 104 ounces. And you write that as a fraction over 1, and then you multiply by the conversion factor. So you go over here to weight, here it is, 16 ounces equals 1 pound. So what we're going to do is we're going to write this as a fraction, and we're going to multiply the two fractions, canceling out the ounces, leaving us with pounds. And so right here, these ounces need to cancel, so that means I need to put ounces on the bottom. So let's see how many ounces there are in a pound. 16 it says. So we'll put 16 ounces equals 1 pound. So I'll put 1 pound on top. So all you do for this method is you line up the numbers or the units that you want to cancel. You line them vertically so that they will cancel, and then you do the multiplication or division. Kind of depends on the problem. In this case, it's a division problem because 16 is on the bottom, 104 is on top. So I just set up a division problem, 16 into 104. So when I look at that, I say 16. Well, I've got, maybe like, if we try maybe a 5 or maybe a 6. Let's go with 6 to start off. Let's see if this ends up working. If not, we'll end up going with the next number higher. So that makes a 36, and 36 times 6 times 1 makes 6, plus 3 makes 9. So that was pretty close, and so we can go ahead and do some subtraction there, see what's left over. We're going to borrow, and when we do that, we end up with an 8 left over. Well, so we'll put up a decimal there, and bring down a 0, and 16 does go into 80. Now let's see how many times, though. Should go in there 5 times. Let's see if that ends up working there. So 5 times 6 is 30. And 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 makes 80. Yes, that ends up working. So there it is. 6.5 pounds is what we're left with. And that would be our answer. So for this method, again, you just set up a fraction, a multiplication of two fractions. When the signs or the units are the ones that you want to cancel, they need to be diagonal from one another. And then if the number's on the bottom, you're going to divide. If the numbers are on top, you're going to multiply. So let's see what we do on this one. Same sort of thing. You're going to end up starting with the 5,000, because that's what we're trying to change, 5,000 pounds. And we're trying to change it to tons. So what that tells you right away, you have tons on top, and we're going to have pounds on the bottom. So let's see how many pounds there are in 1 ton. Right here, 2,000 pounds equals 1 ton. So we can write that down below. And equals 1 ton, and so it's another division problem, because we've got numbers on the bottom and numbers on top. Now we can reduce this fraction. See, I could take out these 3 zeros. That's dividing by 1,000. And so I'm left with 5 over 2 tons. Well, when I do that division, 2 goes into 5. Well, it goes in 2 times with 1 left over. So we could write it as 2 1/2 tons. Well, another example here. This one deals with fluid ounces and pints. So now we're going into capacity. So here we're actually going from, this is where the dimensional analysis sometimes is nice, or just looking at the numbers and trying to figure out how many pints there are in fluid ounces. And so we'll start with the 96 fluid ounces, and we need to cancel out the fluid ounces. So what that means is, using this method, I'm going to put the fluid ounces on the bottom, and I'm going to put the pints on top. And so if I do this, I see that there are 8 fluid ounces in 1 cup. But I don't want cups, I want pints. Pints is the next one out. There's 2 cups equal 1 pint. So 2 cups, well, 1 cup equals 8 ounces. Let's write that down. 1 cup equals 8 ounces. Well, I want 2 cups, because 2 cups equals 1 pint. So how many ounces would that be? Well, 1 is 8, so 2 would be 8 plus 8 would be 16 ounces. So that means there's 16 ounces in a pint, 1 pint. And so now we can get those units to cancel. So these are gone now. And we have a division problem again. So actually I saw 16 times a number makes 96. I did that over here. See, 16 times 6 made 96. So I know I can divide this by 16, reduce this one by 16, and I'll end up with my answer, which would be 6. So 6 pints is the answer for number 10 there. Well, number 20, another problem like that. This is also dealing with capacity. We had no length problems in this section, but I believe you will. So you'll end up using these measurements here. So let's try this one. 20 quarts to gallons. So I have 20 quarts, and I want to go to gallons. So I'm going to multiply by a conversion factor. Here it is. 4 quarts equals 1 gallon. They tell me that one. So I want to cancel out quarts. So I'm going to put quarts on the bottom because I'm doing this method where we multiply the two. And I want to cancel out quarts. So I got 1 gallon on top. So let's go ahead and do that reducing. These quarts cancel out. And I know, okay, I've got a division problem again. Had no multiplication problems this time. Well, 4 goes into 25 times. So I multiply across. 5 times 1 gallon makes 5 gallons. So there it is. So on all of these problems, we had to do division problems. And sometimes we'll end up having to do some multiplication problems. Depends on the type of problem that we're dealing with. So let's take a look at some word problems. I've got a couple of them here for us. So let's start with this one. 1 mile is about 1.61 kilometers. Okay, this is the conversion factor. This is what the chart up top tells us. It's telling us, though, from miles to kilometers, so it's a little different. Volcano is 120 kilometers wide. Okay, so we know that. They want to know what is the width in miles. What is the width in miles? And we're going to go ahead and round to the nearest tenth of a mile. So let's go ahead and set this up. So what we have is this. The volcano is 120 kilometers wide. So we can start with that, 120 kilometers. And we want to change this to miles. So if I use this method of multiplying, I want the kilometers to cross cancel. So I'm going to put 1.61 kilometers. And those kilometers will cross cancel then, and then I'll put a mile equals 1 mile on top. And now if I do this, I'll end up getting these to cancel. So notice I'm having to do another division problem. So I've got 1.61. I've got to divide into 120. And so I'm going to end up having to move that decimal over a couple spaces. Now, they want us to round to the nearest tenth. So that means we're going to end up having to go all the way to the hundredths place. Well, I move the decimal 2 spaces, so 1, 2. And then I'll bring a decimal point straight out because I know I'm going to be dealing with decimals here. And I go ahead and start. So 161. Well, it doesn't go into 120, so the first number I have to put is over here. So it's going to be in this, in the thousands place for the divisor that we have. And so let's try to figure out what it would be. So I'm going to do this method. I'm going to cover up this 0 here and cover up this 1 and think of 16 into 120. Well, back over here we did 16. We saw that 16 times 6 made 96. So let's try something a little bigger. Let's try 161 times by 7. let's try that and see if that ends up working. So off to the side we'll do this. So this makes 7, this makes 42, and this makes a 7, 42, so we get the 4 up here, and then we have 7 times 1 is 7 plus 4 makes 11. So we have 1123, and it looks like that's going to be a little bit, that'll end up working. So we're trying to get 1200, and that's going to end up subtracting. I believe that might end up working if we go ahead and do that subtraction. So let's just check real quick. 1211, 1200, 1123. Do some subtraction there. We end up having to borrow from that 2. Also borrow from the 10. We end up with a 7, and this makes a 7. And it looks like that's going to end up working. So we'll try that. Put the 7 right here. And we end up with, again, this 7, 42, and 11. And we already did the subtraction there, and we end up with 77. And we ended up doing that work. Actually, let's see here. 1123 it was. No, it should have been a 7. I couldn't read my own handwriting. So that was 73. So from there, we go ahead and bring down this 0. And now we need to do 161 into 730. So we're going to do that same trick again. Cover up the 1, cover up the 0, and think of 16 into 73. Well, we saw that 16 times 6 made 96. That was too big. 16 times 5 we saw was, let's see here, 16 times 6 was that. So let's try about 16 times by 5. Let's see what that ends up making. So off to the side we have to do that work. So this makes 80. That's too big. So let's go. We know it's going to be the next number smaller. So we're going to go with a 4. So go ahead and multiply this out, and we'll see what we get. So we end up getting a 4, 24, and this makes a 4 as well. But I've got to add 2, so that makes 6. So go ahead and do the subtraction there, and I end up with having to borrow. This makes a 12. And I end up with a 6 and an 8, and that's it. So 86, and so we have to go a couple more places here. So let's see what's next. So we'll go ahead and try bringing down a 0 and thinking of 16 into 86. Well, I saw 5 ends up working because I know that's 80. So I go ahead and do the work there. That's going to be 5, and that makes a 0 and an 8. Do the subtraction, and I'm left with a 55. 55 because I ended up having to borrow from the 6. Change that to a 5. Well, bring down the 0, and it ends up going in there just 3 times. And when I go ahead and do that work, I get a 3, an 18, and a 4. Well, that's going to end up working. Now, I don't have to go any further, even though it's going to go further, because the 3 is not big enough to round this up. So my answer, rounded to the nearest tenth of a mile, is going to end up being 74.5. So I end up having to round down. 74.5 is smaller than 74.53. Well, let's take a look at the next one. 1 pound weight has a mass of 0.45 kilograms. This is our conversion factor right here. This is what we're going to end up using. So let's go ahead and set up our problem that asks for what is the mass in kilograms. So they want to know kilograms this time. They have a weight of 570. So let's start with that. 570 pounds over 1 times by, and now we got the conversion factor. We want to cancel out pounds. So we put LB on the bottom for pounds, and we've got 1 pound is 0.45 kilograms. All right, we got a problem where we don't have to divide. First one. So here you see the pounds are going to cancel out, and we get a multiplication problem this time. So all we have to do is 570 times by 0.45. So let's see what we end up coming up with here. So when we do that work, we end up with I'll go ahead and just do the problem out real quick, 256.5. And that is going to be in kilograms because that's the units that we have left. So there's the difference. So far we had done all our problems we had to do division problems or reducing the fraction. That's when the number's on the bottom, we got a number on top. Here, they're both on top, so we got to multiply. Well, that's some unit conversion for you. Good luck on tonight's homework.